Welcome, and can you hear me? Yeah. Welcome, and thank you for being here. It is an honor to participate in this event and have two distinguished representatives from the VC community. We have Klaus, that has deep roots into the VC and private equity community in Europe, and you have Jack, that is one of the famous PayPal mafia members that obviously connects with Silicon Valley, as we all know. I don't want to spend a lot of time on introductions, but it's important to highlight Klaus has a fund north of $3 billion, investors like Temasek, like Mubadala. He has been an investor in companies like Skype, Klarna, and a few others. And Jack, he not only manages Peter Thiel's family office and private fund, but he also recently started his own fund to create a new innovation ecosystem in Arizona. So this is going to be pretty interesting to see these two gentlemen talking about their experience and how we can foster innovation in places that have not been in the news or have not been historically recognized, or they don't have the same name as Silicon Valley, right? And let me do a little bit of history on Silicon Valley, right? Santa Clara Valley in the 30s, Stanford University, professor called Fred Terman that decided we need to empower our students to go and build companies, right? Because this is the way that we can convert science projects into actual enterprises. And then suddenly, after many years of that, we had something that historians call the Sputnik moment, right? And this is very relevant to what Klaus is going to tell us in a little bit. The Sputnik moment was the Russians launched the first satellite, and they basically showed us that they were ahead in terms of technology. And the United States government decided that we cannot be behind, so they put the military to start deploying capital, and the only place that they found to deploy that capital that was suitable for their mission was precisely around Stanford University, right? So we had now the combination of very smart people, professors that were incentivized to go and build companies, and students that were incentivized to do that. But now we also have almost unlimited amount of capital that was coming into this region in order to foster this innovation. And this was really the catalyzer for what we have seen in the last 60, 70 years. So let me open the panel and kind of first, there is an elephant in the room. 3 weeks ago, Silicon Valley was known for a lot of things. But then suddenly, Silicon Valley Bank became much more popular. It was in every headline, not only on the tech magazines, but it was also in every other newspaper around the world. So having you here would be great to hear your view on the situation at Silicon Valley Bank, understanding that Silicon Valley Bank has been precisely that financial institution that has been incredibly close to everything that has happened in Silicon Valley for the last almost 20 years. So, Jack, give us a little bit of your thoughts. I know it's personal thoughts,
yes,
but on what happened, and maybe you're thinking on how can the community, how can the tech sector can avoid another Silicon Valley Bank situation?
Sure. So I have to disclaim at the beginning, I'm not talking on behalf of Peter Thiel. I'm not talking on behalf of Founders Fund. These are my personal thoughts. So just so I don't want to get in trouble. So Silicon Valley Bank, I view it from a fiduciary responsibility perspective, and I think there's both good and bad when it comes to this story. And I'll start with the bad in the reverse. So I think for all of us within kind of Silicon Valley circles, after the fact, shame on us for not realizing the concentration risk that we were assuming. So literally 60 to 70% of the entire Silicon Valley community had exposure to this one bank. So imagine if you were in Iowa and every farmer had exposure to the Des Moines First Citizens Bank and there was a drought. That bank would go bust. And so effectively, this is what's happened here. And so I think going forward, we as fiduciaries have to do a much better job in terms of how we think through this. And so that's the bad. The good though, there have been other VCs that have talked about, well, we're a community, and why didn't we step up as a community to save Silicon Valley Bank? I think, personal opinion, that's rubbish. Because our number one fiduciary responsibility is to make money.
Yes.
And so we don't run the Treasury Department at Silicon Valley Bank. Other people do. They're a bank, that's what they should be good at, and they turned out to not be very good at that. And so it's our responsibility to do what's best for people who give us money that we manage. So if you go to Yasser and say, Yasser, I would like $100 million, but my number one priority is the community of Silicon Valley, and my secondary priority is to make money. What do you think happens?
No,
I'll stop there.
give you the money. Absolutely. And thank you for those insights. I'm an operator. I do a little investing, and every founder that I have coached over my career always hears the same message from me, and it's all about diversification. And that's precisely what you just highlighted, right? It's incredible that the most brilliant minds in the world, the most amazing founders, that most likely in their day-to-day business, they practice diversification of suppliers, customers. They talk about customer concentration, supplier concentration. They basically make that mistake, right? And put all the eggs in the same basket. So anyway, so we're clear on that. We can move on and talk about more interesting things. Klaus, I talk about when Silicon Valley really was born, the military was the main funder, right? You just announced a couple of months ago that you are going to be the chairman of the NATO Innovation Fund. So now we have the ministries of defense of the most powerful countries in the world that are in the middle of this complicated geopolitical situation, right? It's probably similar to the Sputnik moment that I mentioned before. Is this the reason that is sparking the launch of this fund? How do you see this fund like empowering founders to build what could be a second iteration of a Silicon Valley, in this case in Europe?
Yes, so I think it's right. It's one of the most fascinating things I've seen in my 20 years being a VC. And a collective decision of all the member states, or nearly all of the member states, to say we will create a fund, and the ministries of defense are the main contact person. That's a game changer because we never had it. Yeah? So the necessity is pretty strong because the normal VCs normally are not allowed to invest in more like dual use, where the dual is a little bit closer to the military. So and I'm also in the board of the Munich Security Conference, and there you could see the first year when the military was talking about investing, or buying stuff. Yes. It's not tanks or planes anymore, it's software. Yeah, so this all together basically for me has led to the priority that this kind of initiatives gives a real push to the entire industry. Yeah? And so this has been necessary, and I'm really excited, and I'm really amazed how professional NATO is managing that project. So it's a real fun project.
Sounds pretty promising. You're then, being the new fuel for what could be a new Silicon Valley iteration, in this case in Europe. Jack, you have a lot of experience on the old traditional Silicon Valley. Let's talk about the things that are not necessarily in the news every day. We talk about Silicon Valley as a success story, and we talk about all the great things that made that happen, right? We talk about the educational institutions. We talk about allowing people to fail, allowing people to experiment. We talk about like almost minimal regulation, and we talk about a lot of community of mentors that generated this sequential kind of serial entrepreneurship. But we have seen it, and probably the Silicon Valley Bank situation was like a wake-up call. We have seen that not everything is perfect in Silicon Valley, right? So if we're thinking about creating a new Silicon Valley, we're thinking about creating a new entrepreneurial ecosystem that is going to foster innovation for the next 20, 30 years. In other places, could be Riyadh, could be Latin America. What should we keep from what made the original Silicon Valley good, and what should we change?
So I think Silicon Valley, probably the biggest edge that they have is Stanford, Berkeley, world-class educational institutions. And those places aren't going anywhere. So you can't move Stanford, you can't move Berkeley. But what you can move are the entrepreneurs that come out of those places. And so if you're a young graduate, I strongly believe, you graduate from Stanford, you have an idea, you still have to do the pilgrimage up and down Sand Hill Road.
Yes.
That's never going to change. But what will change, and what has changed, and the pandemic has only accelerated it, is that if you are a seasoned entrepreneur and you've made money for a Sand Hill VC, and you're looking around, you're living in your little shoebox in Menlo Park that costs $5 million for 2,000 square feet, you're sitting there, well, why are we still here? Why are we raising our family in this, because California, it's blood sport in Arizona to bash on California. I won't do this, won't do that here. But California has been going through a rough patch, to put it politely.
Yes.
And so taxes are through the roof. There are all sorts of different kind of social ills. And so what people have been doing, again, accelerated by the pandemic, is they say, listen, let's throw a dart at the map. If it lands in Sun Valley or Park City or Scottsdale or Austin or Miami, let's move. Because you can literally move basically anywhere in the United States, and the cost of living will be significantly lower than it is in the Bay Area. And the good news is if you're a serial entrepreneur, you're the golden goose. So you don't have to worry the fact that Sand Hill is not around the corner. You're the golden goose, the money will come find you. And so I think the pandemic has been fantastic for the US in the sense that it's democratizing talent in what had been a very dense place in Silicon Valley, and now it's spreading it more universally across the entire country, and that is a good outcome.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Klaus, in the case of Europe, right, do you see this new initiative that you guys are launching, obviously as the foundation for this new concept of a Silicon Valley there, but do you see maybe some of these issues that Jack mentioned that are byproduct of having this high concentration and having all of this amount of money in the same place? Do you see them in the future of what you're building, or are you doing something in order to avoid that?
No, look, maybe I start explaining a little bit about the ecosystem as such, because very few people know that Europe by now has like 320 unicorns for more than 100 cities. Yeah? And there was a long time when it took off that universities play a similar role that they do in the US. Why? Because in the US, the universities are private. Yeah? So they need to market themselves. So the marketing is part of the integral way of thinking. So, and how do they market themselves? By creating good startups. The alumni are proud and put money into endowment. In Europe, 1st of January, Kashing, 1.5 billion from the state to the ETH. And has been a way or a desire to market yourself. So this has changed by the fact that they have hired professors from the US.
The US.
And then you have the Professor Andrea, who sold his startup, robotic startup, Kiva, to Amazon for $1 billion. He comes and says, but I always had my equity in the startups from my institute. So, and this basically changed the whole mentality in the universities to go to a commercializable science and not an ivory tower science. So this is a big step change. So the mentality, the failure has become okay. The drive from the universities is night and day the last 3-4 years. And the states have understood that they need to support the ecosystem in a different way for like systemic sovereignty. So this is something that has changed big time. Because when you think about it, Europe became rich because they financed innovation by 4% of GDP in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it was financed by banks. Now banks have changed the regulatory regime and cannot invest at all. Yes. So venture is the only way how you can systematically start to investing in the new Mittelstand that will be born in Europe. So this is a huge change, and as much as we can debate if the macro picture for Europe is as bright, as little we can debate that these changes lead to a very, very fortunate situation for venture in Europe.
Absolutely. We only have 30 seconds, so I'm going to ask my panelists to give a quick answer to this. So we had Major Suarez here. He's attracting a lot of people to Miami. We're building what could be a Silicon Valley in Miami, right? If you have to give him a couple of words of advice, and a couple of words, what would you tell him?
Keep it up. And so I was having a conversation back in Arizona where I've started this new fund, largest fund in the state. The one ingredient that we're missing, we need a Mayor Suarez in Arizona because he is the best promotional, I mean this in a complimentary way, the best promotional mayor in the United States, hands down, and we don't have one yet.
Got it. Klaus, 2 words.
Yeah, look, I'm not even sure if I'm in a position to give a recommendation because they are usually ahead of us in Europe. So I think it's admirable how everybody of the stakeholders sing the same song. Yeah, so in other regions you're more critical. Everybody is over teaching somebody, yeah. And here with this enthusiasm that everybody is driven by, this is something that I admire, and that is something you can be very proud of because
Absolutely.
maybe
Yes.
it is not for not having it you feel it, but having it you get accustomed to it. So I think it is pretty cool to see how it is flourishing here. Congrats.
Excellent. Thank you for the advice. Thank you, everybody, for your attention, and continue enjoying the show.